Hi, my name's Harriet Bloomfield and I am Education Consultant at Keystone Tutors. I'm sitting with Ed Richardson, who's our Director of Education. We're just going to quickly run through some study skills and revision techniques as we start to think about the lead up to Easter and the revision period. So to start with, Ed, I'd just love to talk to you a bit about pre-revision and how children can start preparing for that.
So I think the first thing they can do is make sure their notes are up to speed. I think they need to ensure that they've got all of the information in a particular subject. The way they can check this is by looking at the specification. There are GCSE and A-level specifications on the example websites, but equally I'm sure schools will have made you aware of what they're going to cover in this topic at GCSE or in this subject at GCSE. I would get that kind of curriculum and I would cross-reference my notes to ensure that I've got everything I need. This would also include then making sure I've got the textbooks, revision guides that I wanted, so that I've got everything I need in that subject area to then start my revision process. The other point, I guess, is top tips are goals. So thinking about what I want to achieve and by when. But I guess that kind of leads slightly more into timetables.
Okay, so you've got everything, you've got all your files in good shape.
Yeah.
You're thinking now, how do I build a revision timetable?
Yeah.
Where would you start with that?
So I think about what time of the day do I revise best, and also I'd think about that information in conjunction with the timeline that I've got. So I'd work out when my exams are. I'd work back from that on a week-by-week basis. I'd work out what weeks are holiday weeks and what weeks are in-school weeks. And then I can think about the time today that I could work best. In a school week, clearly you've got a busy week, but there will be free time in there where you could be doing some active revision. And in the holidays, there should be lots of time to be doing some revision. Typically, I'd recommend somewhere in the region of around 4 hours minimum a day. I'm always a bit dubious about those students who say they do 8, 9, because I think that feels like quite a lot of time, particularly when the average person struggles to concentrate for more than about 30 to 45 minutes. So I think that's quite an important point. And I'd section out the day and think about, when would I work sort of best. A lot of my students say they're night owls, but fundamentally, if everyone was a night owl, we'd have night school, and we don't in a really substantial way. So I think I'd be looking at the time between 9 and 6 or 5:30, and I'd be trying to kind of make sure that I'm using that time wisely with some good breaks in there. Breaks are crucial. But I think what's important about breaks is you should go and do something completely different. Avoid technology because it can just suck you in, and before you know it, you spent the whole break watching Netflix. And I think I'd try and get outside and get some fresh air in so that you can sort of liven the mind again.
Okay, so you've got the timetable now, you know what you're meant to be doing and when. What are the techniques that people should use to make sure that their revision is as structured and effective as possible?
So I think there are lots and lots of different revision techniques that one can choose, and so I wouldn't be wanting to advocate too many, but I think flashcards are very good. They basically are a boiled down set of your notes. They're really good to give to parents, friends, brothers and sisters for assessment. So you could give the information to them and then they can just create questions around what's on the card. So I think flashcards are essentially a boiled down version of your notes. Spider diagrams, more visual elements, or placemats, which are sort of presenting a topic on a sort of an A3 or an A4 piece of paper. Often students stick them around the room so that they're naturally in their eye line. They can be hugely useful. I would think about carefully though how you lay out the information. You don't want it to become too confusing. It wants to be very clear why you've laid out the information in the relevant way. So a placemat is when you split a piece of A4 paper into 4 along the diagonals, and you might have sort of key events, key people, key processes, and then questions asked typically around this topic in the exam. And so it boils everything down that you would need to know. So that's very, very effective. So I think probably those two for me sort of jump out as things that are really effective and active revision processes. The crucial bit is you're active. Reading is passive. You need to be able to manipulate the information and be doing something with it. The most basic revision technique is to read over something and then to cover it with a piece of paper, and then on a blank piece of paper to be writing out or responding to a particular question around the information you've just read. That's much more active than simply reading something and requiring your mind to remember it.
Okay, and thinking about that, how then can people see whether they're making progress, whether they are having a positive effect through their revision? How can they track that?
I think constant assessment is going to be important, but that's not just past papers. That might be, I'm going to look at my notes of photosynthesis, I'm going to do a worksheet that I might have found, or I'm going to look at a revision guide and they've got some worksheets or activities I could do in that, and then I'm going to ask one sort of past paper sample question about this. That will give you a really good indication of where you're at in terms of learning the information. But obviously that's only learning it then and knowing it at that point. What you'll need to do then is come back to it again to ensure that information has been retained in your mind. So I think constant assessment gives you a really good sense of where you are. But I think assessment isn't only doing past papers. Flashcards, I said, is a good example. So I tend to advise students to build an assessment half an hour, 45 minutes or hour within the day, where they just do assessments but in a range of different subjects potentially. So they're trying to work out whether they've remembered what they did in the morning, for example, in a particular subject area. So I think constantly assessing is useful. And you can do that in groups, come together as study groups. They can be hugely valuable as long as approached diligently and responsibly. And that can be very helpful to get your friends to sort of test you and you to test your friends. That can be incredibly useful in terms of committing information to memory.
Great. One final area I'd love to cover is, obviously getting the information and understanding the information is just one part of this. Then being able to use that effectively in an exam environment to make sure that you're using that information in the best way possible to achieve the most marks possible. How do you build exam technique into your revision? How would you recommend that?
So I think there are three things for me. The first is understand the examiner. The second is understand what the question is asking you. And the third is being able to work under time condition. I think understanding the examiner is absolutely crucial. I think you should be looking at mark schemes. And if you haven't been doing that in schools, I think it's really important. Mark schemes are freely available normally on the Example websites, and they give you such good information in terms of what the examiner is looking for. And often it's key terminology. You get a mark simply for saying photosynthesis or carbon dioxide, or I'm talking about science, but it'd be the equivalent in other subjects, obviously. So I think understanding what an examiner is looking for, and the only way you can do that is by reviewing mark schemes, I think is really important. There are also examiner reports that are published each year, which indicate what students were strong at, what students found very difficult. I think actually students can read those, and I think they're very helpful. So I think understanding the examiner is a really important thing. Understanding the question, most students fall down, I think, by not reading the question properly or carefully. So I think the rule of thumb should be you should read it twice at least. I think the second thing is probably underline key exam verbs or commands within the question and make sure you understand what they mean. A lot of students don't understand, for example, the difference between describe and explain at GCSE level. That will then inform what the mark scheme is looking for. So if you misinterpret that, you could just not get the marks. So I think thinking about the exam verbs and understanding what the exam questions are asking, I think, is going to be really important. And the way to practice that is to read an exam question and then write it out in sort of basic English. What is this exam question actually asking me to do? I think that's a very good technique to use. And then the third thing is time conditions. Number of marks often means the amount of time you should spend on doing something. So if it's a 6-mark question, you should be spending 6 marks on it, 6 minutes on it. So I think that's quite an important part. But don't forget planning within that. There's often got to be allowed time for planning and then reviewing your answer. So try to think that. So I'd be trying to practice under time conditions, whether that's just one question or a half a past paper or a section within a past paper. I think I'd be getting a stopwatch out and trying to work to that.